And hi, we're going to commute again today. And unlike the other times, I have nothing really prepared in advance to say. So it could be anything, we could ramble anywhere on this journey. Suffice to say that during these unprecedented times that we're in, part of what I've enjoyed, and it seems weird to talk about enjoying things right now, but there are some nice silver linings to the experience of living through this time, and one of them has been that we here in Saskatchewan haven't been suffering through like mass deaths and mass cases. Like every death that happens is a tragedy, obviously, and we want to keep our cases as low as possible, obviously, but we are working with a pretty big safety net in that we're not having cases go right off the charts and be confined to our homes in fear and trembling. So for most people, the risks and the threats and whatnot were gone pretty quickly, as far as like you're not actually like your odds of getting sick are pretty low, and your odds of getting seriously sick are just as low. So people were left with time, and we haven't had this much time in a long time. Like if you think about, and like go back in time for yourself and think about how when you were younger, stores were closed on Sunday and there were far fewer activities and people were just less run off their feet all the time. But now Sunday is a day like any other, and sure enough that now I think we're looking into having like Christmas and Easter becoming into days like any other, that if you allow commerce and business to come in, they will take any avenue they possibly can, right? Like if you are not zealously protecting a Sabbath, then the Sabbath will go away, almost by definition. That'll just happen. You may think that you have a Sabbath worked out just as a day off, but nature abhors a vacuum. The world that we're in right now doesn't really want there to be days off where you can just rest. They're very keen to fill that day back up again with new and other things. So when the Sabbath was no longer specifically set aside for the worship of God, when it moved from being the day in which you go to church and you have to have time off to do that, to a day that you have off and you can do whatever you want with it, the envious eyes of commerce and industry turned themselves towards that time, and they said, basically, we're not comfortable with just having that time. We're not comfortable with people not doing anything. We're very agitated about that, and we don't like leaving resources on the table. So what we're going to do is, when there is a day off that is not used for something, it will get used for something else. The stores gradually, piece by piece, opened. Commerce gradually, piece by piece, established itself more. There were more and more times and occasions in which that space, that day that had been set aside as the day for worship of God and then as a day of rest, became occupied by everything else, which happens. It happens very easily and very quickly. The vacuum can't exist, or can't exist for very long. So what we saw happening was a movement directly away from worship of God and then away from rest and towards every day being like every other day. So now every day is about buying and selling and staying busy and staying occupied to the best of your ability, and there's nothing left resembling what you or I would call a day off anymore, or in any kind of way that we can recognize it. But this pandemic time, again, especially here in Saskatchewan, where it was not like you weren't allowed to leave the house or anything like that, you could still go to the park and spend time with your children and that kind of thing. You just couldn't. A lot of the stores were closed. People were working from home, that kind of thing. And it became for us a mandatory Sabbath in a way that we haven't had before, that we're not likely to have again since. The fact that you had time where you were actively discouraged from going to work, and you were in some places, not here, but in some places you were prosecuted for doing too much. And that's new for us. We haven't had that happen before, where there was a limit on what you should be doing. You were not allowed to work too much or go too far or carry too many things, that kind of thing. we're very used to the idea of piling more stuff on. We're not used to the idea of having mandatory rest police as they would have had in the first century. Like when those people were stopping Christ from healing on the Sabbath or whatever, that's kind of like, in a very roundabout way, very much like we had recently in certain countries, certain jurisdictions, where you weren't allowed to gather with too many people. Like there's a limit on the number of people. You weren't allowed to go X amount of distance from your home unless it was to like take 10 minutes of exercise or to buy food, that kind of thing. There were certain necessities, but a lot of things you just were not allowed to do. Literally were not allowed to, and the police would come over and fine you for it. Now, part of the resistance that Christ had with the Pharisees back in his earthly ministry was that they were enforcing the Sabbath as a day of rest, but not enforcing the worship of God, right? They were there to say, you can't carry your bed too far, you can't take too many steps, you can't gather sticks, you can't, and only ever creating a vacuum. But vacuums don't last very long. They really don't. You can't have a vacuum running in perpetuity. And for us, in our enforced Sabbath that we've been in, after the first initial surprise of saying, gosh, gee whiz, I guess I can't go to work, I guess I can't gather with people, I guess I can't, so what can I do? What am I going to do at this time, beyond Netflix and shopping online? And a lot of people found themselves able to do things that they had not considered doing before, doing things where they were working in a different capacity, volunteering in a different capacity, reaching out with people that they now had time to talk to. You've got the time now. And one of the other things that was happening was that people were, no jokes, reconnecting with God in a way they hadn't done before. Because the thing about worship of God is even well-meaning Christians will say that they just don't have time to read the Bible. They don't have time to go to church. They don't have time to develop a prayer or a devotional life, because who's got the time, right? Everything's too busy. But in this mandatory Sabbath, when that vacuum showed up, it wasn't going to last for long. You can't leave it as just, I'm going to do nothing all day for very long. At some point, something else becomes the thing you do. And you had time for the first time in a long time. But now people are going back to work, they're going back to school, they're getting busier with this and that and so on. That's all fine, of course. But we had a very slim amount of time in which we could develop these things. But the great thing about right now is that not everything is back yet. Certain things still just are not happening. Certain things are not happening and not occurring where you're not having movie theaters or buffets or banquets or these sorts of things. And you get time to sit and reflect a little bit more as to what you want to do at this time that you still have. You won't have it forever. The best thing that I can talk about right now has been, and it's a really good illustration for it, has been with couples that are getting married these days. Because in these difficult times, when a couple comes to get married, I've got a wedding coming up next week, when a couple comes to get married, part of what they do is they sort of lament the fact that they can't have the big party, the big gathering, the big get-together. They lament that for a little bit. But the other thing that they do, which is great, is then they're able to say, but what do we want to do for us only? If it was just us, because it almost certainly is. And they end up, like, instead of the big party, just going out for dinner with their close friends, with their immediate family, going to like the steakhouse or whatever, and enjoying their company. And the bride and the groom are not rushed off their feet. They're not exhausted. They're not too tired to connect. They are instead really appreciating what it's like to be married in that first little bit. They're going to have a big party later. There will always be time for a big party later where you get everybody together and have a big party, a big throwdown, and that's great. But in these times, the fact that you have time to take even a wedding Sabbath is wonderful, and lets you focus on something different other than just letting commerce and industry take hold of everything. All right, thanks for joining me. Talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.